So once we have a good idea of who we are as an organisation and what we're about and where we want to go, we need to conduct what we call a SWOT analysis. And I know that we've talked about SWOT analyses before, but this is the second stage in our strategic management process, where we're going to actually start to identify what are the strengths and weaknesses of our organisation, so the things that are internal to us, and what is our opportunities and threats which come from our external environment. So the key point that I want to emphasize here, because I know we've done SWOTs before, is that strengths and weaknesses are the things that are internal to the organization. So sometimes this gets confusing for people. So the strengths are what the organization does really well, or any particular unique resources or assets that it has. So if you have a particular piece of IP, or if you're a record label and you've secured a particular artist that is going to be a unique resource that you're going to be able to leverage to promote your label, that will be one of your key strengths. And it doesn't have any bearing on what happens outside the organization. It's something that is internal to you. And then your weaknesses are things that you either don't do too well or things that you need but you don't currently have. Now, strengths and weaknesses can be relative to the external environment, but just keep in mind that it is internal to the environment. It's what you have or do not have. Then when we look at our opportunities and threats, this is where we're going to be analysing the content that we looked at in chapter 2 of the book, The External Environment, where we're looking at our kind of industry and immediate environment. So that's our stakeholder analysis. And you might remember we used a Porter's in entrepreneurship, which was an analytic tool that helped us analyze the external environment, as well as the PESTLE, which was the tool that we used to evaluate the general environment. And so these things that exist in both the general and the specific environment present opportunities and threats to our organisation. And so we want to be able to identify them initially. So what are the potential opportunities that come from those trends in the external environment? And what are the negative trends or things that are actually going to negatively impact us potentially in some way, shape or form, which are the threats to our organisation. So let's have a look at a couple of examples from the documents we were looking at before. Often you won't be able to find this information because normally organisations don't make it public because it's part of their competitive advantage, is part of what they've identified as their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. But we do have a couple of examples here. So this is in the Wangaratta Festival of Jazz and Blues, and they've actually gone through and spelt out the SWOT analysis that they've done. And they've, I imagine, prioritized them here as well. So they've gone through a process of not only identifying what are their strengths, opportunities, weaknesses, and threats, but they've actually then put them in some order around, you know, this is our key strength, our second highest strength, etc., which then enables them to actually take that information and start to design strategies out that align with this. So I'll let you have a bit of a look at that and dig into what kind of things you think are particularly relevant to you, or that either surprise you or that you think, oh, that's a really good one, I could perhaps use that somewhere. And particularly any that you think you that they're not quite clear, right? So for example, this weakness of capacity constraints, like if we don't necessarily know what that means. Obviously, it might mean something to that organisation, but always be trying to write things in a way that if you come back to it in a year's time, you're not going to be going, oh, what did I mean by that? And this might be one of those examples. The other example I'll show you is in this independent record business plan. And what this guy has done is done his analysis, but then he's written up the key things that have come from that analysis. And so you might want to have a look at this because I think it'll be of interest to some of you who are interested in starting labels, and dig into whether you think he's right, based on what he's written. It's only a couple of years old, but he's identified that his key strength is his ability to have low costs. So that's something that he's considered is his key competitive advantage. And he's identified his key weakness as his lack of resources, which is common and normal for a startup. And as you go through this document, you'll see that once it gets to the financials, you'll start to see that yeah, he is pretty limited in resources. And then in terms of his external factors, so internal being his strengths and weaknesses, external being his opportunities and threats. He's identified his key opportunity as existing in breaking into the Asian markets. He's in the US, so he's seeing that being able to break into the Asian market is a key opportunity. And then his key threat is kind of being poached by a major record company. So again, I'll let you have a bit of a look at that, do your own review and analysis around whether you think he's on the money, and then how you might start to think about any venture that you're looking at or any organization that you would like to work for. What might you see as their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, and particularly how it relates to their overall mission and guiding principles.